sociologist Fabien Truong. Your books include Radicalized Loyalties, Becoming Muslim in the West. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me, François.
We have seen first this tragedy on Tuesday with the shooting death of a 17-year-old, video footage that shows the officers basically told lies when they about what was transpiring, and then every night since, the riots escalating. Is it the same as 2005 when two youths fleeing the cops dying sparked 3 weeks of rioting?
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, there's nothing new under the sun. It's a very common process now. The relationship in between the police and the young teenagers and the male teenagers is bad since years and years and years. And every time there's a problem, and in that case, a death, there's a strong identification process. And it's the same thing. We have the same thing with Zied and Bouna in 2005. And every year, there's young people dying in the French banlieue. So there's this sort of identification process. And because this is a very common experience for a young male teenager in the banlieue to have had a very bad interaction with the police, whether it's ID controls or interpellation, or so all of this resonates from a very intimate point of view. And what we can see at the moment is basically young guys, and we must insist as well that they do represent the minority of the young people in the suburbs who go out at night to release their anger because they do identify to this. So this is pretty similar. What's different, nevertheless, is that now there's images, so as you rightly pointed out, and that makes it quite different because before we had, the narrative from the police, the narrative from the young people, and now we've got images and footages, which spread a lot of emotions, obviously.
They spread a lot of emotion, and they also have led to charges being pressed against one of the officers, voluntary homicide. Your reaction?
Yes, because we can see the political reaction is very different. In 2005, the political powers were condemning the youth, and the justice time has been very long. It's you had a trial. 3 years after, then another trial, 10 years after, and then no charge over the police. And now, President Macron actually did something he should not have done as a president. He should not have commented. But obviously, when you see the footage, and everyone has seen the footage, on a political point of view, he had to comment it, and he took sides because, it is obvious when you see the footage that there is a big problem into the narrative of the police. So that does change everything. And
does it change everything? Because, yes, Emmanuel Macron called the images that he saw inexplicable and inexcusable. But we saw back in November of 2020 a black music producer who was roughed up by the police. They initially accused him of instigating it until CCTV footage proved otherwise. They've not yet gone to trial.
Yes. In that case, it's a death, and it's a death as shooting close range. So in some ways, that's in terms of it's a bit more spectacular, if I may say so. So that's slightly different. Plus, it's a young person; he's 17. So there's lots of different things, but as well, I think it's the accumulation as well, because it's not just Nael. There's Michel Zecler. There's been Adama Traoré, and so much more. And it's a bit like if I may say so, the cherry on the a very dark cake. So there's that.
And yet the response of the government now in dealing with it in trying to soothe the violence is more law enforcement. The announcement by the government that they're sending armored personnel vehicles for the gendarmes. Your thoughts on how the government's responding and how it should respond?
Yeah, well, again, are we speaking short term or long term? Because, I mean, on the short term, obviously, this has to stop and it will stop. You know, it's a very common pattern now. So we know at some point it's going to stop because there's no project beyond this, you know, outburst of anger. It's just a release of teenage male anger at the moment. But what we need to have is a strong structural reform of how the police should and could intervene in the neighborhood of the banlieue. Because what you also really need to understand is that the inhabitants of the banlieue, they do want the police to come. They do need security. There are places that concentrate, you know, a lot of poverty and hence social violence and insecurity. And people want to be secure. And they would like the police to come and do their job. But when the police come, because there's no close contact with the population, and they do suspect that every young male is potentially a delinquent, it creates a lot of problems. And a lot of parents have said that they're concerned when the police is coming. So in some ways, as it is at the moment, when the police comes in the neighborhoods and it's weekly, it creates more insecurity and it adds insecurity, and that's not the point. So this needs to change, and the French police needs to work in close contact with the population, the other adults who deals as well with the youngsters, and have a different approach of what is order and what's its mission in a place like the banlieue. And so this is a heavy structural reform that needs to be done, but we know this for a very long time.
That's in the long term. In the short term, you mentioned how it's a minority that are looting shops and throwing stones at town halls. Still, how does the government get their message across, both to the people inside these working class suburbs, the banlieue as they're called in French, and to the rest of the country?
Yeah, well, at the moment, this has to stop. So, it's the police is going to be in place, try to stop it. There's also a lot of work on the background from associations and mediators and workers to cool things down. So that's also happening in every areas, because at some point, I mean, those outbursts of violence, they're only penalizing, the banlieue and the areas. I mean, youngsters, they burn their own place. So it will eventually stop. I've got the feeling that because the état d'urgence has not been declared, there's the will not to, escalate in the way you display repression from a political perspective. But obviously, at the moment, the police needs to stop those youngsters who are out and release their anger. But, we've seen that many times before.
Yeah, we've seen it many times before, Fabien. You wrote your book, Radicalized Loyalties, in 2018. This was in the wake of the Paris attacks. And you write in the book about what it means for people in these working class suburbs to be French or to feel French. Have things changed in 5 years?
Yes, I mean, and also because now there's always this tendency to talk about the banlieue when you have this outburst of violences. But I also want to reiterate that we're talking about the minority of young people. So, and actually, if you talk about the banlieue, there's a really it's very split. I mean, half of the youngsters and the population is actually finding its way to French society. Like, for instance, we've never had so many kids from working class background in banlieue doing further studies and finding also job with their diploma. So that's a part of the population. But what's happening in France is when the population from working class background and from the banlieue socially succeed, they leave the banlieue and they are replaced with families which are newcomers, which got more problems. So there's two ways when you look at the banlieue. The banlieue gets more and more problem because half of the population is kind of stuck and has no real future. And that's a part of the truth. And these outbursts of violence, they do in many ways illustrate this part. But there's also a part of the population, and it's the other part, and it's almost half and half, who find its place and who's now has a voice, And if you took the arts, if you took sports, if you took culture, if you took businesses, there's now a lot of people who have been growing up from the banlieue and who are voices of the French, contemporary society. And regarding, this violence, you had Kylian Mbappé, you had Omar Sy, you had also journalists who are coming from the banlieue who've been speaking about all of this. And it is also the banlieue who is now present, within the main French mainstream society. So there's these two dynamics that you have to take into account.
Two dynamics that we're seeing. We saw with the fact that there was this viral video that quickly changed the narrative on what happened to 17-year-old Nael, that we're in the digital age. The digital age, which means more transparency, it's harder to tell lies. And it also means, and this is something that the French president addressed earlier, that those digital natives sometimes are organizing to do bad things. Let's listen to Emmanuel Macron.
Internet platforms and social media networks are playing a considerable role in what we've seen over the past few days. We saw on several of them, Snapchat, TikTok and several others, both violent gatherings being organized and a sort of copycatting of violence. Among the youngest in society, this leads to a sort of escape from reality, and we sometimes get the impression that some of them are living in the streets of the video games that have intoxicated them.
Yeah, flash mobs organizing on Snapchat, which says it's, quote, continuing to monitor the situation. Your reaction, Fabien Truong, to the words of Emmanuel Macron there?
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of truth in the sense that with, the social network, there's, and especially when you're a teenager, there's a sense of competition. So you want to do more and more. And also of, it's quite spectacular to post things and to get comments. And so there is that element. But also, I think Emmanuel Macron, in many ways, confuses cause and consequences because the social network, they do come after the outburst of violence. And this is not the social network per se who's causing the outburst of violence, and there's the outburst and this visceral anger is coming first. And it's not coming from social media, it's coming from the day-to-day relationship in between young male from the suburbs and the French police. And that's what's creating, the outburst, and that's the cause. Then after, when it's released, yes, there is this social media thing who might play a role in, a certain sense of escalation, but it really comes afterwards, like the first causes and people basically become violent not because they've seen a video on TikTok, they might become a tiny bit more violent, if I may express myself like that, but they do become violent because they've got nothing to lose and that they feel that they're not heard and that they could have been at, Nael's place.
Many thanks, Fabien Truong, for joining us. Sociologist Fabien Truong, whose books include Radicalized Loyalties. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Francois.